Today, we're skipping the standard biography tropes you've probably heard a million times before. No listing off dry dates and hometowns. Instead, we are jumping straight into a totally different angle, exploring how the brutal, chaotic battlefields of the 20th century literally forged Ernest Hemingway's iconic revolutionary writing style.
It brings up this totally fascinating question. How exactly did the muddy, bloody front lines of the 20th century forge America's most famous literary style? It's an incredible story of trauma, deep observation, and an absolute obsession with truth. We're going to take a chronological journey through the conflicts that defined him, and I promise you, by the end of this explainer, you will see his prose in a completely different light.
Okay, let's dive into this. With one of his most profound observations. The world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong in the broken places. This line from his 1929 novel, A Farewell to Arms, establishes the overarching theme of Hemingway's entire life and work: trauma, resilience, and mortality. But, obviously, before he could write about being broken, he had to learn how to write.
So we have to rewind to 1917, well before the literary masterpieces. A very young Hemingway had just stepped right out of high school and directly into a job as a cub reporter for the Kansas City Star. He was only there for 6 months, but the impact of that newsroom was monumental.
The paper had an incredibly strict style guide. Use short sentences. Use short first paragraphs. Use vigorous English. Be positive, not negative. Think about all the bloated, fluffy emails or articles we read today. Well, Hemingway actually credited these exact, punchy rules as the absolute bedrock of his entire revolutionary prose. They trained him to strip away the fluff and deliver information with razor-sharp clarity.
Just looking at his timeline, the sheer staggering volume of conflicts he embedded himself in is undeniable. From World War I to the Greco-Turkish War, the Spanish Civil War, and World War II. He had this magnetic, lifelong draw to danger zones. He couldn't just observe from a safe desk. He literally needed to be in the absolute thick of it.
That obsession really kicked off during World War I. In May 1918, a teenage Hemingway arrives in Paris right as the city is under active bombardment from German artillery. From there, he doesn't retreat. He immediately travels to the Italian front to volunteer as an ambulance driver for the American Red Cross. He was just a kid, really, suddenly thrust into the most extreme environments imaginable.
Now, what's really interesting here is how he processed that environment. Instead of adopting the traditional 19th century style of flowery, highly emotional prose about the horrors of war, Hemingway relied entirely on unadorned reporting. On his very first day in Milan, he was sent to retrieve the remains of female workers at a bombed munitions factory. Years later, he described it simply as, "After we searched quite thoroughly for the complete dead, we collected fragments." The horror is entirely in the facts themselves, not in the adjectives.
But the true turning point happened just a few weeks later, on July 8th at Fossalta di Piave. Hemingway is out delivering chocolate and cigarettes to soldiers at the front line when his group suddenly comes under heavy mortar fire. He gets severely wounded, taking shrapnel to both of his legs, and yet, despite those devastating injuries, he heroically manages to carry an Italian soldier to safety. He later explained that this specific near-death experience violently stripped away his boyish illusion of immortality. Because when you get hit like that, you know it can happen to you. That massive trauma, combined with his heartbreak over a Red Cross nurse named Agnes, basically supplied the raw, deeply psychological material for what would become his 1929 masterpiece, A Farewell to Arms. So when you connect those early Kansas City journalism rules with his massive World War I trauma, it leads directly to his most famous literary innovation. The way he processed a world that had suddenly proved to be overwhelmingly violent and meaningless was by inventing a completely new way of writing about it.
He called it the iceberg theory, or the theory of omission. It's this minimalist writing style where the surface facts are stated super cleanly, while all the heavy emotional weight and trauma lurk unstated beneath the text. He realized that the objective facts, if stated purely enough, could carry the immense emotional burden of a damaged post-war generation without ever actually spelling out the feelings.
And this brilliantly illustrates the whole concept. In his own words from Death in the Afternoon, the dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of it being above water. By intentionally omitting things he already intimately knew, like the visceral terror of a mortar shell or the absolute panic of bleeding out, the unspoken reality actually strengthens the entire narrative. The reader truly feels it, rather than just reading it.
Fast forward a bit to 1937. Hemingway returns to Europe, but he's no longer a cub reporter.
He's a mature, established writer, and he signs on as a correspondent for the North American Newspaper Alliance to cover the Spanish Civil War. But just like in World War I, sitting back and safely watching was just not in his DNA.
His style of reporting was incredibly immersive and insanely dangerous. He's working on a film soundtrack, he's visiting active fronts, and during the final Republican stand at the Battle of the Ebro, he literally had to row a boat for his life across the turbulent river while under heavy fire because the bridges were destroyed. He was constantly putting his life on the line to capture the absolute, unfiltered truth of combat.
His acute observations of this brutal ideological conflict culminated in his 1940 novel For Whom the Bell Tolls. He wrote it while moving between Cuba, Wyoming, and Sun Valley. And the book was an absolute smash hit, selling an astounding 500,000 copies within months and triumphantly reviving his literary reputation. It was a direct, raw product of his time in the Spanish trenches.
But, as we know, the world didn't stay quiet for long. Moving into the 1940s, Hemingway initially tried to help the WWI effort by using his own boat, the Pilar, to patrol for German U-boats off the coast of Cuba. Eventually, though, his wife Martha Gellhorn essentially shamed and bullied him into getting back to Europe, and he signed on with Collier's magazine.
When he got there, his iceberg theory was put to the ultimate test. He was actually off the coast of Omaha Beach on D-Day. Just listen to his chillingly detached, factual description of the horrific casualties he witnessed, looking like so many heavily laden bundles on the flat, pebbly stretch between the sea and first cover. He's showing you the absolute horror through cold, completely objective imagery. His movement across the European theater from that point was rapid and completely chaotic. From D-Day, he pushes inland, and amazingly, he actually broke the Geneva Convention. He acted as a de facto captain, leading armed French resistance fighters outside of Paris. He claimed he beat the rap by arguing he was only offering advice. He then went on to witness the liberation of Paris and the heavy, brutal fighting in the Hurton Forest.
But look, a lifetime of chasing this kind of intense material is absolutely going to catch up with you. This lifelong addiction to combat, violence, adrenaline, and living on the absolute edge finally started to break him down, both physically and mentally. So the crucial point is this staggering number, 9. Forensic and historical examinations strongly suggest that Hemingway suffered from at least 9 serious concussions during his lifetime. The sheer physical trauma his brain endured over those decades is almost unbelievable.
Cataloging this relentless physical destruction paints a pretty grim picture. From those severe shrapnel wounds as a teenager to a 1944 car crash that required 57 stitches, another crash in 1945, and famously surviving 2 back-to-back plane crashes in Africa in 1954 that literally left cerebral fluid leaking from his skull. Experts today theorize he suffered from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, which was totally masked by his macho, heavy-drinking public persona.
The final years were tragically difficult. He suffered from intense paranoia and severe depression. In late 1960 and early 1961, he was secretly admitted to the Mayo Clinic, where he received rounds of electroconvulsive therapy. Hemingway lamented that the treatments erased his memory, which of course was his primary capital as a writer. Sadly, unable to write and suffering immensely, he took his own life on July 2, 1961.
But as we look back, it is so essential to remember the man behind the myth. When he won the Nobel Prize in 1954, he sent a speech that included these poignant words, "For he does his work alone, and if he is a good enough writer, he must face eternity, or the lack of it, each day." Behind the brawling, macho war correspondent was a deeply scarred man fiercely, entirely dedicated to finding the absolute truth in his prose. When you look at Hemingway's whole life, the bravado, the adventures, the crisp, perfect sentences, how much of the real truth is hiding beneath the surface? Perhaps his life was the ultimate tragic realization of his own iceberg theory, with the most painful realities submerged deeply out of sight. Thanks for checking out this explainer, and I hope this completely changes how you read his incredible legacy.